Hello, you're watching Race to Power. I'm Shreya Upadhyay. The big story tonight is the Iran-US peace understanding. While the details still remain sketchy, the question is, has President Donald Trump secured a deal that is better than Barack Obama's? Remember, Trump had withdrawn from the JCPOA in 2018. In 2026, has he led America to a better position or not? We decode this for you. And in what has come as a shock to the White House, officials believe that two reporters may have obtained audio recordings of the Situation Room meetings for their book, Regime Change. An Access report has come out with all the details and the security breach of one of the most secure rooms on earth. More on this up ahead. But first, let's talk about what has been happening between Iran and America and the peace understanding that has now come to the fore. United States and Iran have achieved a major breakthrough to end the war, which has gripped West Asia for over 3 months now. Both sides have reached an agreement on a memorandum of understanding. Now, this MOU is not the final agreement, but what it does is it paves the path toward negotiations on the final deal. Now, representatives from America and Iran are scheduled to sign this MOU on the 19th of June in Geneva. Leading up to the formal adoption, both sides will continue pre-implementation of the discussions. Now, what does this MOU really entail? Remember, neither Iran nor the United States has provided the official text of the MOU that has been agreed upon. All we have for now are conflicting statements from officials from both sides and source-based reports. Announcing this critical development, Donald Trump said that the naval blockade on Iran will be lifted immediately and that the Strait of Hormuz will be open to all commercial vessels. But hours later, Donald Trump said that the U.S. naval blockade would be removed and the Strait of Hormuz would reopen after the planned signing of the deal on Friday. However, Iran's foreign ministry said that maritime service fee will be charged in Hormuz. Apart from this, Iran says that the U.S. has committed to compensations, releasing frozen funds under the deal. According to Iranian media, U.S. will be releasing $12 billion of Iran's frozen assets after signing of the MOU. However, remember, there's no official response yet from Washington on the existence of such a clause in the final deal. Now, this entire premise of the war with Iran was to degrade its military capability, create conditions for regime change, and force Iran to give up its ambition of acquiring a nuclear weapon. Donald Trump says all three objectives have been achieved and that he will have Iran sign a nuclear deal soon that is better than Obama's JCPOA. Let's quickly also tell you Obama's Iran nuclear deal, which was signed in 2015 and it remained in force until Trump pulled out of it in 2018. The deal ensured that Iran would not seek, develop or acquire nuclear weapons. Iran's nuclear enrichment was capped at 3.67% for 15 years. In return, the US and European nations lifted sanctions on Iran and they released its frozen funds. Under the Obama-era deal, Iran agreed not to seek a nuclear weapon. But Donald Trump argued that it was binding for only 15 years and that a new deal with Iran would not have such an expiry date. But to achieve this, Donald Trump will have to overcome a major roadblock, and that is Israel. Israel is not a signatory to this MOU. If the American president fails to convince Benjamin Netanyahu to withdraw Israeli forces from Lebanon, this entire deal with Iran could collapse. Tehran has made it clear. A peace deal with the US must ensure an Israeli withdrawal from southern Lebanon and the cessation of all strikes by Israel. During an interview with ABC, former US President Barack Obama raised doubts about the possibility of a better nuclear deal with Iran than the JCPOA.
It is doubtful that any agreement that arises is going to be significantly different or a significant improvement from the deal that we had in the first place and had worked for a long stretch of time before the United States pulled out of it. So I'm hopeful that bombing stops and ordinary people are no longer suffering as a consequence of the war.
Meanwhile, according to the U.S. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, the main difference between Trump's deal and Obama's deal is that Obama begged Iran for a deal while the current administration bombed them. But will that end up being the only difference, or are there more? That's the big question. All right, joining me on Race to Power tonight is Giorgio Cafiero, professor at the Georgetown University and CEO of Gulf State Analytics. He's joining us live from Washington, D.C. Giorgio, good evening. Welcome to WION. Before I go to the similarities and differences between what Trump has been perhaps able to achieve and the JCPOA, I want to understand from you what you think of this latest understanding between Iran and America. Do you think it's going to sustain itself, considering the fact that the big elephant in the room is Israel, is Benjamin Netanyahu?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me back on your program. I think obviously there is reason to be grateful for the fact that the U.S. and Iran are set to sign the Islamabad MOU on Friday in Switzerland. It's important, but at the same time, I think there's good reason to be skeptical. We know that there's very, very little trust between the two sides. The fundamental issues that have been driving tension are unresolved. We also have seen in recent years that ceasefires don't necessarily mean too much in the Middle East. And to really get to your question, Israel has its own interests in sabotaging U.S.-Iran diplomacy. So I think for the Trump administration, it will be very important to put pressure on Israel to rein in Netanyahu in order to see to it that Tel Aviv does not play a spoiler role here. This is going to be critical to the success of diplomacy between the United States and Iran, making sure that Israel's aggression is reined in. If the Trump administration fails to put sufficient pressure on Israel, I have no doubt that the Israeli leadership will do whatever it takes to sabotage the diplomacy between the United States and Iran that countries such as Pakistan and Qatar have been working very hard to facilitate.
Right. Giorgio, when we talk about what Donald Trump has said about this latest understanding between America and Iran and what Barack Obama achieved under JCPOA, or the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, what do you think, which one holds a better deal? Which one has gotten more from America as far as extracting from Iran is concerned? Because the basic premise of both these deals has been, number one, that Iran doesn't, further enrich its nuclear stockpile and caps it, something that the JCPOA already had achieved 95%, I believe, a little over 95% as far as stockpile was concerned. And then the sanctions relief. Do you think that is something that will have a solid confirmation in this deal, will have an upper hand in this deal, which Donald Trump has been trying to get?
Yeah, so just to be clear, this recently announced MOU that's going to be signed in a couple of days is going to open up the space for the two sides to begin negotiating on the very difficult issues, including the nuclear file. We don't know quite yet what the terms will be on any new nuclear deal between the U.S. and Iran that is to be negotiated in this upcoming period. In terms of what is going to be committed to by both Washington and Tehran on Friday, in the general public is not really aware of that. And so I think right now there's kind of this war of narratives in which Trump's supporters on the U.S. side are telling us certain things, and then the Iranian leadership on the other side is saying something else. And I think both sides are trying to spin the facts, which the general public just simply does not have right now. So it's a little difficult to comment on how, to what extent, if at all, Trump has been able to secure something for the United States that from an American standpoint is better than the 2015 JCPOA. I would say that while a new nuclear deal between the US and Iran might be a little bit different from the 2015 JCPOA, I have a very difficult time imagining that Iran would concede much more this time around than it did back in 2015. I think it's important to realize that Iran feels very emboldened right now. And let's remind your viewers that for many years, for many decades, Iran threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz. And so many people in the United States and other countries thought that Iran was bluffing and that that was a move that the Islamic Republic would not make. Well, this year, Iran did close the Strait of Hormuz, and they demonstrated that that secured a lot of leverage for the Iranians. And as a consequence, I repeat, Iran is feeling very emboldened right now, and I do not see Tehran really conceding much more this year than they did back in 2015 when Obama was in the White House and the JCPOA passed.
Yeah, which was what I was coming to next, Giorgio. And fair enough, you say that it's too early to compare what Trump has achieved under this understanding and the JCPOA because we don't have the finer details of what has been agreed upon. But as you said, doesn't Trump's America leave Iran more emboldened and at a stronger position than Barack Obama's America? You've got Iran militarily also giving a befitting reply to American forces. You've got Iran holding the Strait of Hormuz in its control. And now you've got, Iran also putting its foot down on its nuclear enrichment. So clearly Trump is leaving a stronger Iran behind.
I would say that I agree with that. When this war began in late February, the United States was expecting, or at least the Trump administration, I should say, was expecting a decisive victory in a matter of weeks. Look at the situation right now in the middle of June. I don't think anyone can expect a fall of the Islamic Republic anytime in the foreseeable future. If anything, I think what we now see is more hardline elements in Tehran at the helm. And clearly the fact that Lebanon was included in this MOU that was just announced goes to show that Iran is doing quite a bit to revive the axis of resistance that suffered severe blows back in 2024. And the fact that Iran retains much of its missile capabilities also speaks to the resilience of Iran as a powerful regional force. And therefore, I certainly agree with your point that this time around, in middle of 2026, Iran is feeling very emboldened, a totally different environment compared to 2015, when I think the United States really had an opportunity to move forward and start a new chapter with Iran and potentially rebuild some of the trust that had been degraded over the previous decades. It will be much harder right now to imagine the U.S. and Iran rebuilding some sort of trust. But I will say, I am grateful, though, that at least the Trump administration has decided to take this off-ramp, and I do think this was the best option that the Trump administration had at this point.
All right, Giorgio, let's see how this moves forward and whether finally the world can see peace between the two sides. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Giorgio, for joining us on WION and sharing your perspective.
Good to be with you. Thanks a lot.
All right, with that, let's move on and tell you how the US president rang in his 80th birthday with a rather unprecedented celebration. Trump hosted a cage fight at the White House lawn with thousands attending this event. Donald Trump was seen walking out of the Oval Office alongside the Ultimate Fighting Championship UFC boss Dana White, and he headed toward the giant arena dubbed the Claw. Trump then took his place on the South Lawn beside the mesh-fenced cage called the Octagon, where 14 fighters beat each other bloody in the first professional sporting event ever that was held at the White House. Following this event, Donald Trump shared a post on Truth Social to praise the incredible night. He also went on to call it one of the most exciting days in the history of the White House. But like most events involving Trump, this one too was not without protest. Remember, several people were seen demonstrating on the sidelines of the venue with Palestinian flags and banners that read, and I quote, "They fight, we feed." The event was linked to this year's festivities for the 250th anniversary of American independence. However, it not only happened to fall on the U.S. public holiday of Flag Day, but it also was on the same day that Trump entered his 80s. Well, there's panic in the White House amid speculation over alleged secret recordings from the Situation Room meetings. According to an Axios report, senior White House officials suspect that New York Times journalists Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan may have obtained audio recordings of the Situation Room discussions for their upcoming book, Regime Change. Independent recording devices are prohibited inside the Situation Room. Remember, making any unauthorized recording a serious breach of security protocols. The suspicions stem from the remarkable level of detail that is contained in excerpts published by the New York Times ahead of the book's release on the 23rd of June. The excerpts reportedly describe high-level discussions on foreign policy and domestic controversies, including matters related to the Epstein files. One account details the American Secretary of State Marco Rubio's sharp criticism of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's strategy on Iran. Another portrays senior officials discussing whether Ghislaine Maxwell could help divert attention from the scrutiny, surrounding President Trump. White House officials cited in the Axios report that they have not disputed dialogues from the top secret Situation Room talks. In fact, Trump, according to this report, is furious by the blow-by-blow account. If authentic, the alleged leak would raise serious concerns about the security of the Situation Room, long regarded as the venue for the American government's most sensitive deliberations. However, Axios in the report has noted that Haberman and Swan conducted more than 1,000 interviews for the book, which covers Trump's second term, suggesting that access to audio recordings may not have been necessary. It cited the example of veteran journalist Bob Woodward, who helped pioneer modern political journalism by reconstructing detailed conversations in his books from interviews with participants and witnesses, rather than relying on audio recordings. The report argued that such accounts can be assembled through extensive reporting and first-hand recollections of those present during key discussions. Haberman and Swan have meanwhile declined to Axios' request for a comment on the allegations. Well, shifting our focus to the UK now, Britain's far-right activist Tommy Robinson finds himself on the radar of the country's police. Robinson said that he was arrested at London's Heathrow Airport and detained for nearly 3 hours after returning from Russia. The detention comes just days after Robinson called for protests following a knife attack in Northern Ireland. The incident was followed by 2 nights of riots targeting migrants.
Now I'm telling you, you need to save your communities because
London's Metropolitan Police confirmed that a man in his 40s was arrested upon arrival. Authorities said the individual was detained under the 2019 Counter-Terrorism and Border Security Act. The police said the man was interviewed by the officers, had his communication devices seized, and was later released. While the police did not name him, Tommy Robinson said that he was the person detained by the police. Now, Tommy Robinson is one of Britain's most recognizable and polarizing far-right figures. He's built a following through campaigns focused on immigration, Islam, and what he describes as failures of the British establishment. Supporters view him as a campaigner against illegal immigration and extremism, while critics accuse him of stoking division and fueling anti-Muslim sentiment. Robinson called for public protests after the knife attack in Northern Ireland. In the days that followed, the city of Belfast saw 2 nights of unrest and rioting, with immigrants as the target of the violence. For now, there has been no indication of any charges being filed against Robinson, and the police is yet to disclose further details about the investigation.
Send them home! Send them home! On your knees! On your knees!
So remember, this is the latest that's happening in Britain. This latest arrest, of course, Tommy Robinson saying that he's the person who was arrested. He was detained and then released. Clearly a deepening divide between the far right and the far left in the UK, something that Prime Minister Keir Starmer has been speaking about as well. It comes right ahead of the local elections as well.
Send them home! On your knees! On your knees!
All right, moving on. The highly anticipated G7 summit begins shortly in France's Evian. But just a short distance away, the Swiss city of Geneva witnessed clashes between the police and thousands of protesters opposing this gathering as demonstrations escalated in the region over the weekend. People turned out in large numbers to protest against the meeting of the world leaders as demonstrations escalated in the run-up to the G7 summit. Protesters chanted slogans across a range of issues, including support for Palestinians, climate action, feminism, and anti-capitalist movements. As per the police, while many demonstrations remained peaceful, some black-clad protesters broke through security barriers near affluent residential areas and set vehicles on fire. Protesters threw firecrackers and bottle fragments at the police, who responded with water cannons and tear gas to disperse the crowd. Several buildings near United Nations European headquarters were also reportedly damaged during the unrest. Demonstrators criticized the summit as a gathering of elites, saying extraordinary security measures were disrupting daily life and treating ordinary citizens like criminals.
Yes, of course, we're nothing. We're microbes, pests, bad guys. Just look at how the repression in Geneva took the lead in barricading everything, the checkpoints, as if we were the bad guys, when it's really the powerful of this world and capitalism who have wrecked the planet.
Ahead of the arrival of world leaders in Evian for G7 summit, France has deployed nearly 16,000 security personnel, including police, arms, troops, firefighters and border guards. French authorities have also deployed sniffer dogs and robotic units as part of heightened security operations. Switzerland has mobilized up to 4,000 troops to support local police forces. Before the summit kickstarts, France's President Emmanuel Macron was seen interacting with security officials and police groups in the lakeside town. Moving on, anti-government protests continue to rock Albania for a third consecutive week. Thousands in the country demonstrated against a luxury resort development on an environmentally sensitive island. The project is linked to US President Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and it has triggered anger among Albanians who are now calling for the Prime Minister to resign. Take a look.
embarrassed that it's our American countrymen who are propagating this, are participating in this. So we see this as stealing the land from people, destroying the environment, all for greed and power.
With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Race to Power. But before you go, just a reminder for all our viewers across India, you can catch all the 2026 FIFA World Cup matches on Z5. Tune in and catch all the action live.
You can have 1,000 problems in life until you have a health problem. And then you have only one. Health is wealth, a timeless proverb that has resonated through generations. It reminds us that physical and mental well-being are life's most valuable assets. At the WION Health Pulse 2026, we tap into the health concerns that matter to you the most and explore actionable strategies to safeguard the ultimate wealth, your health. 4 pulsating themes, 100 plus thought leaders, one dynamic platform. WION Health Pulse, because your health matters. Where darkness hides behind every corner. Where the truth is stranger than fiction. A show that dives deep into the stories which shock and mystify. Unsolved murders. Psychopaths who defy explanation. International war crimes. And millions swindled in financial fraud. The victims, the accused, and the sinister plot. Prime Crime is your front row seat to darkness.
Vielleicht nur als Impulsant.
We're glad you're tuned to WION The World as one. Time now for fine print. American Joker, the headlines. US President Donald Trump says oil tankers are moving out of the Strait of Hormuz, apparently on a route near to Oman, following a peace deal with Iran. US Vice President J.D. Vance says that the text of an agreement to halt Iranian war will be released this week, says the deal has been signed digitally as further negotiations over the deal's details are set to continue. A 1,000-year-old monastery that symbolizes Ukraine's spiritual and cultural heritage has been badly damaged in the heaviest Russian aerial attack on Kyiv in 2 weeks. Ukraine claims at least 10 people were killed nationwide in the overnight strikes. President Trump arrives in Geneva to attend the G7 meeting of world powers in neighboring France, with allies hoping his outlined deal with Iran translates into a swift reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Oil prices dropped towards $80 a barrel and stocks rallied after Washington and Iran reached a deal to end the West Asia war, sending a wave of relief through global markets. One of the title favourites, Spain, kick off their 2026 FIFA World Cup campaign against Cabo Verde, who will be making their tournament debut in a short while from now. Russia has launched its heaviest attack on Kyiv in weeks, striking the historic 1,000-year-old Pechesk Lavra. Moscow has dismissed attacking the cathedral. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky calls for more pressure on Moscow from G7 leaders who are meeting in France. Here's our report.
Kyiv is under siege. Russian drones and missiles roar across the Ukrainian skies. Explosions rock busy streets. Residents run for life as glowing debris falls across the city. This is Moscow's heaviest attack on Kyiv in a fortnight. Ukraine is facing its darkest hour. Russia has unleashed a barrage of 611 drones, 70 missiles in overnight blitz. The unrelenting Russian strikes have sparked a blaze at a 1,000-year-old monastery in Kyiv. Pechersk Lavra, located in the heart of Kyiv, is one of the country's most treasured religious and cultural landmarks. The monastery holds huge significance for Orthodox believers in both Ukraine and Russia. Apart from striking one of Christendom's holiest sites, Ukraine claims Russia targeted the Arsenal Cultural Exhibition Center and one of the capital's main postal hubs, severing a vital artery of civilian life. Reports suggest Moscow used Zircon hypersonic cruise missiles, Kh-101 cruise missiles and Shahid drones to strike Kyiv. The deadly Russian assault has left residents in shock and anger.
Honestly, I am outraged. This is a holy site. They also claim that it is their holy site. You must not strike a sacred place, especially since the Kyiv-Pechersk Lavra is, so to speak, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It is horrifying.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who inspected damage to historic Kyiv monastery, claims 2 Russian drones deliberately targeted Lavra. He says Moscow doesn't want to end the war.
Before G7 started, I'll be honest, we gave message that we are ready to meet with Putin during G7 because Trump is there and Macron is there, Starmer and Merz. So Europeans plus America, this is a good, I think, very good opportunity to meet all together, and that's why we could be able to invite Russian side, and Europe and the United States was agreed, and Russia demonstrated again that they are not ready to speak about peace.
But Russian military has a different story to tell. It says it carried out a massive strike on military sites in Kyiv, Kharkiv and Dnipro, but denies targeting the Lavra. Moscow claims the UNESCO World Heritage Site was hit by an outdated US Patriot air defense missile. The fresh strikes comes a day after Zelensky said he had spoken to US President Donald Trump and has discussed efforts to achieve a peace deal ahead of the G7 meeting in France. As fighting rages on the ground, Russia says that it is committed to Trump's peace proposal and awaits its implementation.
We are committed to the agreements reached on August 15th of last year in Alaska. President Putin has repeatedly stated that he accepted President Trump's proposal, and we certainly expect that the position agreed upon based on the American proposal will be implemented. We expect another visit from Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Kushner in the foreseeable future.
But the Russian attack drew significant and widespread global condemnation.
Russia showed the extent of its cruelty by massively striking the capital, Kyiv. For us French, would be the equivalent of bombing Notre Dame or Saint-Denis, something that is obviously unacceptable.
Russia has intensified its onslaught against Ukraine. It vows to continue fighting if peace is not struck on its terms. With G7 leaders meeting in France, the big question is, will there be a path to peace? Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
As Iran-United States negotiations edge closer to a possible breakthrough, differences have surfaced over the future of Lebanon. For months, Lebanon has been sustaining barrage of Israeli attacks. Its fate has now become a major hurdle in securing a wider peace deal. In the latest, Israeli Prime Minister, that is Israeli Interior Minister Ben Gvir, has declared that the Israeli military will continue its presence in southern Lebanon. He has warned that should Iran launch any attack, Lebanon will be hit with full force.
We must continue to demolish the houses in southern Lebanon. We must continue to push back the residents of southern Lebanon. We must continue to eliminate Hezbollah terrorists in Lebanon. Every fragment or drone, every missile, every shot that is launched, that is fired at us, we must respond to it unequivocally. And yes, also respond in the Dahiyeh.
While Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has not affirmed or denied the statement, several far-right members of his coalition said Israel would not be bound by the terms of the agreement. Under the proposed deal, an end to attacks in Lebanon is a key condition for the agreement to materialize. Meanwhile, Iran has been pressing the United States to ensure that Israel remains committed to halting violence in Lebanon. In fact, Hezbollah has welcomed Iran's efforts to include security guarantees for Lebanon in the proposed deal.
The United States must honor its commitments, commitments that are based on this understanding it has agreed to. And it must ensure that the Zionist regime also fulfill its own commitments regarding the cessation of war in Lebanon.
For months, the Israeli Prime Minister has heavily lobbied the White House to maintain absolute military pressure. Israel has also continued its offensive in Lebanon, claiming to target Hezbollah via air and on the ground. Amid this, US President Trump publicly turned up the heat on Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. Trump claims Netanyahu almost derailed US-Iran peace talks, calling him a very difficult guy. In fact, Trump used expletives at Netanyahu to express his anger for not committing to the deal. Reports indicate that Trump is furious at Netanyahu for recent Israeli military actions, which he believed were intentionally designed to derail negotiations with Tehran. Israel struck Beirut's Hezbollah-controlled